Rome wasn't always the grand city we know. At first, it was just a small village, ruled by 7 kings over nearly 250 years. Each of these kings helped build the foundation of Rome, facing challenges and paving the way for the future. Over time, Rome began to grow and stand out among the cities in the region. Now, let's meet the first of them, Romulus, and understand how this story began. Romulus knew that the weight of founding Rome wasn't just about building walls or organizing troops. He carried something much greater, the responsibility of shaping a people. From the very moment he took the crown, it became clear that ruling wouldn't be simple. To him, ruling Rome was like guiding a child who didn't yet know how to walk alone. It was slow work, filled with uncertainty but also determination. Strength wasn't enough, Romulus needed to be just. And that wasn't always easy. In the early days of his reign, Romulus found himself with a divided people, each group coming from different places, each bringing its own customs and ways of life. The city was a mosaic of cultures he needed to unite, not through force but through order. His first major decision was to create a set of simple laws. He understood that without rules, without a guiding compass, Rome would fall apart. Romulus, who had faced so many personal challenges, now found himself trying to be more than just a leader. He needed to be a father to his people. Every decision made was a step toward shaping the city, but also a step toward carrying the weight of responsibility, which grew every day. Still, he knew that laws alone wouldn't be enough to ensure Rome's survival. The lack of women in the city was a problem he couldn't ignore. Roman men longed to start families, but neighboring cities refused to join their destinies with such a new, unstable city. It was then that Romulus made one of the hardest decisions of his life. By abducting the Sabine women, he knew he was forcing a path that would bring conflict, but he also knew that without it, Rome wouldn't survive. What many called pragmatism was, for Romulus, a painful burden. He didn't want to rule at the expense of others, but sometimes there was no choice. His reign was marked by constant challenges but also by a courage many didn't understand. At the end of his life, when the weight of power became almost unbearable, Romulus disappeared as mysteriously as he had risen to power. Some said he had been taken by the gods, but to those who knew him, Romulus was always just a man, full of doubts and fears but with a strength that came from the need to protect the future of his city. With Romulus' disappearance, Rome needed a new direction. Numa Pompilius, the second king, would bring a time of peace and wisdom, distancing the city from swords and focusing on spiritual balance. After Romulus' death, Rome was left without direction. The people were used to the strong, warlike energy of their founder, but now they needed something different. That's when Numa Pompilius was called to take the throne. He wasn't Roman by birth but a Sabine, living a quiet life far from the city's chaos. When asked to be king, Numa hesitated. He loved peace, silence, and the reflections that came with his simple life. Governing Rome, a growing city still full of conflict, wasn't something he sought. But deep down, he understood that he could help. Not through strength, but through the calm the Romans lacked. And that's exactly what he did. Numa made one decision right away. He decreed the closure of the gates of the Temple of Janus, which were only open during times of war. This gesture showed the people that Rome needed a time of peace. He believed that for the city to truly grow, it needed to stop fighting. And Rome, in a way, embraced this new vision. Numa introduced a series of rituals and religious ceremonies, believing that the people needed something more to feel united and protected. During his reign, he managed to maintain peace. He didn't engage in battles, instead, he resolved issues through dialogue. Numa wanted Rome to grow based on wisdom, not just strength. And so, the city began to take shape differently, learning that sometimes power can also come from tranquility and respect for life. With Numa's death, Rome returned to times of war. The next king, Tullus Hostilius, would bring a new era of battles and expansion, returning to the path of strength. When Numa Pompilius died, Rome changed direction once again. The new king, Tullus Hostilius, was completely different. To him, Rome needed to grow through strength, and the peace Numa had built seemed more like a weakness than an achievement. Tullus believed that the city could only expand by showing its strength to its neighbors. As soon as he took the throne, he began searching for reasons to go to war. It didn't take long for a conflict with Alba Longa, a rival city of Rome, to arise. Tullus saw this as an opportunity to prove that Rome was destined to be the strongest city in the region. A famous battle between the two cities became legendary, the fight between the 3 Horatiae brothers from Rome and the 3 Curiatiae brothers from Alba Longa. Instead of involving large armies, the fate of the cities would be decided by these 6 warriors. In the end, the Horatiae won, and Tullus used this victory as proof that Rome was on the right path. But Tullus' reign wasn't all about victories. He focused so much on war that he neglected what Numa had built, such as religious rituals and the pursuit of peace. For him, military strength was what mattered. Although Rome grew with his conquests, there were also problems within the city. Tullus believed war would solve everything, but over time, he realized that fighting wasn't always the answer. With the end of Tullus' reign, Rome needed a leader who could bring balance between military strength and peace. The next king, Ancus Marcius, would be that figure, attempting to unite the lessons of Numa and Tullus. When Ancus Marcius came to the throne, Rome was changing once again. What he found was a people divided between 2 styles of leadership. On one side, there were those who still remembered the peace brought by Numa Pompilius, with his rituals and respect for faith. On the other side were those who had grown accustomed to war and military growth under Tullus Hostilius. Ancus knew he needed to find a path between these 2 extremes, keeping the city strong without letting it fall into the chaos of war. Ancus wasn't unfamiliar with this task. He was Numa's grandson and had always carried with him his grandfather's lessons about the value of faith and tradition. Early in his reign, he decided to bring back many of the religious rituals that had been set aside during Tullus' rule. He believed that Rome needed balance, not just military power, but something to unite the people with a greater purpose. But Ancus also knew that the world around Rome wasn't peaceful, so he prepared for the challenges ahead. During his reign, Ancus expanded Rome but always tried to avoid constant wars. One of his greatest achievements was the founding of Ostia, the port city that would be crucial for Rome's future trade. He understood that the city's growth didn't depend solely on military victories but on creating conditions for the people to prosper. Whenever possible, Ancus tried to resolve conflicts peacefully, but when war was inevitable, he knew how to lead his army and ensure Rome emerged victorious. Ancus was the king who managed to bring some of Numa's wisdom while dealing with the military side left by Tullus. By the end of his reign, Rome was stronger but without losing its roots and traditions. After Ancus Marcius' death, Rome would meet a very different king. Tarquinius Priscus, the next to rule, wasn't Roman by birth and would bring new ideas that would begin to transform Rome from a city into something even greater. When Tarquinius Priscus became king, Rome was already growing, but there was still much to develop. Tarquinius, on the other hand, wasn't Roman by birth. He came from a people called the Etruscans, who lived north of Rome and had a different culture. Despite not being Roman, Tarquinius believed he could take the city to the next level. He brought new ideas and a way of governing that the Romans hadn't yet experienced. As soon as he came to power, Tarquinius wanted to make Rome grow faster. He knew the city needed to change to strengthen itself. One of his first decisions was to increase the number of members in the Senate. He wanted more people involved in important decisions, believing that Rome needed more voices and better organization to continue growing. In addition, Tarquinius began investing in constructions. He wanted to beautify the city and bring a spirit of modernization he saw in his homeland. But Tarquinius wasn't just a king of projects and internal changes. He also reinforced the Roman army, making sure Rome expanded its lands and dominated its neighbors. He knew Rome needed to be strong to ensure its survival, and his conquests helped increase the city's power. With his victories and the modernization he brought, Tarquinius left an important mark, showing that Rome was ready to grow in a more organized and ambitious way. With Tarquinius Priscus' death, a new king would come to power. Servius Tullius would bring important social changes, reorganizing the structure of Rome and creating new ways of governing. Servius Tullius didn't come from a noble background. Unlike the kings who came before him, Servius came from a humble family. He rose to the throne through his intelligence and ability to solve problems. Some said he was the son of a slave, but that story was never confirmed. What mattered was that he knew how to take care of Rome. When Servius became king, he realized Rome needed to change. He believed the city couldn't continue to function only for the wealthy. One of the first things he did was create a system where more people could participate in decision-making, both in politics and the military. This helped bring more balance to Rome and better organized life in the city. Additionally, Servius cared about security. He decided to build a great wall around Rome, which became known as the Servian Walls. This defense was essential to protect the people and ensure the city was prepared for any threat. With this, Rome became a safer place. Servius made many reforms during his reign. He gave more space to the people and organized Rome in a way that had never been done before. However, his ideas also created enemies, especially among those who didn't want change. With the end of Servius' reign, Rome's throne was taken by Tarquinius Superbus, the last king of Rome. His rule would be marked by tyranny and actions that would lead to the fall of the monarchy and the rise of the republic. After Servius Tullius was killed, Tarquinius Superbus seized power by force. He didn't come to the throne in a just or peaceful way. His own father-in-law was the victim, and this violent beginning already showed the kind of ruler he would be. Tarquinius didn't respect the traditions of Rome. He didn't consult the Senate and did everything on his own. It was as if he wanted to show that all the power was in his hands. Tarquinius' actions alienated the people. He cared only about Rome's expansion and his own power. While Rome grew in territory, discontent within the city grew. The people felt ignored, and Tarquinius increasingly gained a reputation as a tyrant. He ruled with only his interests in mind, and with every decision, the gap between him and the people widened. But the breaking point came when Sextus, Tarquinius' son, committed a terrible act against Lucretia, a respected woman of Rome. This crime was the final straw for the people. Already tired of the abuse of power, they rose up. Lucius Junius Brutus led the Romans against the king. The result was clear: Tarquinius and his family were expelled from the city. Rome decided it no longer wanted to be ruled by a king. Thus began the Republic, where power would be shared among different leaders. Tarquinius Superbus was the last king of Rome. His arrogance and disregard for the people caused the fall of the monarchy, paving the way for a new chapter in the city's history. With the fall of Tarquinius, Rome began to be governed by two consuls, marking the beginning of the Republic. The time of the kings was over, and Rome entered a new era, full of challenges and opportunities. When Tarquinius Superbus was expelled from Rome, the people felt relief. Years of abuse of power and decisions that ignored the city's well-being had finally come to an end. But the question remained: what would come next? No one wanted to live under the rule of a king anymore. The Romans, tired of being governed by a single person, decided it was time to try something different. Thus, the idea of the Republic was born. Instead of a single man in charge, Rome would be governed by two consuls who shared power. This decision was made to ensure that no one would become so powerful as to feel like a king. The fear of returning to tyranny was fresh in everyone's minds, and they wanted to prevent that from happening again. The first consul chosen was Lucius Junius Brutus, the man who had led the revolt against Tarquinius. Brutus was respected by the people, seen as someone who truly cared about Rome and had fought for the city's freedom. Alongside him, Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus was elected, who, despite bearing the name Tarquinius, had shown loyalty to the new cause. However, the very fact that he carried the name of the former royal family caused great discomfort. The people were still wounded, and any reminder of the monarchy brought feelings of distrust. Over time, Collatinus was forced to step down, showing just how deeply the fear of returning to the past ran. In the early years of the Republic, the city faced challenges. Tarquinius Superbus didn't accept his fall easily. He tried to reclaim the throne, seeking support from other cities to regain power. But the people of Rome were united. They knew they couldn't let the monarchy return. Rome had changed, and the sense of freedom was something no one wanted to lose. Slowly, the new form of government took hold, and the Senate began to play a more important role, helping to guide the city toward a more just future. With the Republic in its early stages, Rome would face new challenges, both within and beyond its borders. Disputes between social classes and the need to expand territory would bring even more conflicts and transformations for the city. With the end of the monarchy, Rome entered a new phase. But, as with any great change, difficulties quickly arose. The people were excited by the idea that now everyone would have more of a voice. There was no longer a king in charge, and power seemed to be more balanced. But tensions between the rich and the poor began to grow. Despite promises of more justice, the poorest citizens still felt excluded from important decisions. The wealthy families, the patricians, controlled much of the Senate and made the most critical decisions for Rome. Meanwhile, the plebeians, who made up the majority of the population, realized that, in practice, little had changed for them. They were still forced to pay heavy taxes, serve in the army, and live under laws they had no part in creating. This discontent began to grow silently and soon became one of the Republic's biggest challenges. One of the first moments of tension came when the plebeians refused to continue fighting in Rome's wars. They simply withdrew from the city in what became known as the secession of the plebs. This was a shock to the patricians, who realized that without the plebeian support, Rome couldn't defend itself or conquer new territories. The plebeians demanded rights. They wanted to elect their own representatives, someone who could defend their interests within the Senate. Thus, the position of tribune of the plebs was born, a representative chosen by the people to fight for their rights. It was a victory for the plebeians, but the path to equality was still long. Even so, this was one of the first steps toward making Rome a city where more voices were heard. The Republic, still in its early years, began to face the internal challenges of a divided society. The young Roman Republic was undergoing its first trials. Internally, Rome was dealing with tensions between patricians and plebeians, but there was also another challenge, the need to expand its territory. Rome was no longer just a small city, and the Romans knew that to survive, they needed to grow. But Rome's growth meant coming into conflict with neighboring cities, which viewed this expansion with suspicion. The first major battles came with the Etruscan cities, powerful neighbors to the north. These wars were difficult for Rome. Each defeat left the people uneasy, and victories, when they came, were always accompanied by heavy losses. For ordinary Romans, war was a burden. The plebeians were forced to fight, while the patricians controlled military decisions. On the battlefield, life was harsh, and men fought with the hope that their families would be safe at home. With each battle, Rome grew stronger, but the cost was high, and many questioned how far this expansion was worth it. One of the most important conquests during this period was the victory over the city of Veii, one of the richest and most powerful in the Etruscan region. The war against Veii lasted for years and was a test of endurance for Rome. When they finally managed to defeat the city, the Roman people celebrated like never before. But the weight of the battles left its mark. Wars brought wealth, yes, but also a weariness that seemed never to end. With each new territory conquered, Rome was transformed. New roads were built, connecting the conquered cities to Rome. Trade increased, and Roman influence began to spread. But at the same time, the Romans knew that each victory brought new enemies. The Mediterranean was a region full of rival powers, and the Republic would have to prepare for even more conflicts in the future. With its expanding territory and new victories on the battlefield, Rome was no longer just a simple city. The Republic was growing and becoming increasingly powerful. However, the struggles over land and internal conflicts showed that the path to greatness would be long and full of challenges. Rome's story was just beginning. Are you enjoying the content? Leave a comment with a topic you'd like to see covered in the next videos. Your opinion is very important to us.